Dr. Klausman who works here. Chapter 10. Why don't you wait right here? The woman said, standing up. I'll have the security guard show you the exit. I have to find Dad first, Ian thought. There's something very strange going on in this museum. He spun around and ran back into the hall. He heard the woman shouting for him to stop, but he took off, running down the long corridor, Doll staring at him all the way. Breathing hard, he turned a corner, and that's when he saw the figure in the far distance. So far down the hall, Ian could barely see him. Dad? Ian squinted hard, struggling to see. The man was walking slowly, half hidden behind the haze of white ceiling lights. He walked steadily, arms down at his side. Ian waited for him to come into focus. It had to be his dad. Had to. But why was he walking so slowly? Dad, here I am, Dad! Ian's voice rang off the walls, echoed down the hall. He started to trot toward the approaching figure. But after a few steps, he stopped with a gasp. The man was wearing the baby doll mask. Dr. Klausman? Ian called, his voice high and shrill. The masked man didn't answer, just kept walking, slowly and steadily, moving toward Ian like some kind of machine, or like a puppet, Ian thought. Dr. Klausman, have you seen my dad? Ian cried. No answer. The man came slowly walking closer. The baby doll mask glowed pink under the ceiling lights. Why isn't he answering me? Ian wondered. Fear suddenly tightened his throat and froze him in place. The man came toward him, hands at his sides. Slow, steady steps, his shoes scraping the marble floor. Panic kept Ian from turning and running. The grinning baby doll with its red lips was only a few yards away. And then the man stopped inches in front of Ian. Dr. Klausman? Where is my dad? Can you tell me? Silence. Please, Ian cried. Answer me! Answer me! With a desperate cry, Ian raised both hands. He raised both hands and ripped the mask away. He tore the mask off and stared at the man's face. And then Ian uttered a roaring scream that echoed down the endless hall. Chapter 11. Dad! Ian cried. Dad, why didn't you answer me? Why are you wearing the mask? His dad's face was red and dripping with sweat from being under the rubber mask. He gazed at Ian a long time, and then his eyes flashed and a grin slowly spread across his face. Happy birthday, Ian! He cried. The young woman from the office appeared behind them. Happy birthday, Ian! She called. She waved to an older man in a black suit. I'm Linda, and this is Barney. He played the part of Dr. Klausman. Happy birthday, Barney said in his whispery voice. Mr. Barker slapped Ian on the back. Gotcha, he said. That was your birthday adventure, Ian. Did you enjoy it? Enjoy it? Ian cried. I was terrified. Success, his dad said. He gave Barney and Linda a big thumbs up. It took a long time to plan this for you. Ian shook his head. Wow, wow. When those dummies all came to life and started to laugh, I totally freaked. Mr. Barker turned to the two museum workers. I want to thank you for your time. Do I get one of those awesome dummies as a birthday present? Ian asked. No way, his dad answered. Those dummies are museum pieces, Ian. Maybe someday you can have a dummy of your own. Maybe someday. As they turned to leave, Ian saw Barney's silvery eyes flash. And in his whispery Dr. Klausman voice, Barney murmured, Be careful what you wish for, Ian. Be very careful.
Slappy here, everyone! Some people may think Mr. Barker's birthday surprise for Ian was mean. He scared the poor kid half to death. I thought it was a scream. Did Ian honestly think all those dummies in that museum could come alive? Who ever heard of such a crazy idea? Well, it was a birthday Ian never forgot. And he never forgot how much he liked working a ventriloquist dummy and making up jokes with it. When he got home, he made his own little dummy in art class, with a papier-mâché head and white gloves for hands. He named him Corky, and made up a lot of jokes to perform with him. But the mouth didn't move, and neither did the eyes, and the head kept falling off the body. It wasn't the same as a real dummy. And hand puppets just weren't as much fun. Ian asked his dad to buy him one. Mr. Barker said they were expensive and hard to find. But now, 3 years later, here we are at Ian's 12th birthday party. And he's got the real deal. Me!
Chapter 12. Ian couldn't wait to practice with Slappy. His birthday wish was to become a great ventriloquist. His other birthday wish was for Johnny and Vinny to go home. Now there was the dummy's torn-off hand to deal with. Mrs. Barker made her way to the kitchen to get lunch ready. Molly disappeared with her doll. The 3 boys followed Mr. Barker downstairs to his doll hospital to watch him attach Slappy's hand. Slappy's head thumped hard as Mr. Barker stretched him out on the work table. "His head weighs a ton," he said. "The puppet maker used very hard wood." The dolls on the shelves all appeared to stare at them. Their tiny eyes glowed in the bright light from the ceiling. Vinny picked up 2 doll legs and made them walk across the table. Johnny found a tall action figure, a doll with a red mask and blue cape. He grabbed it and stabbed his brother in the stomach with it. "Hey, watch it!" Vinny grabbed another doll. The 2 brothers used them as swords, slapping each other in a fast sword fight. "Hey guys, that's my work," Mr. Barker said, sighing. "Put them down, please." He didn't get angry easily, but Ian could see that he was starting to get really annoyed with the 2 cousins. Johnny gave his brother one last hard poke in the ribs with the action figure. Then he set it down. Ian watched as his father slid the dummy hand into the jacket sleeve. "Hey, check this out!" a voice called from the stairs. Ian turned to see Molly burst into the basement, holding her iPad in front of her. "I looked it up," she said breathlessly. "Do you believe it? Slappy has his own Wikipedia page." "You're joking," Mr. Barker said. "What does it say?" Ian stared at his sister. She loved looking things up. She carried her iPad everywhere so she could share information with everyone. She took notes about every doll in her collection. She liked to know all kinds of facts. "This is so weird," she said. She lowered her eyes to the screen. "It says that Slappy wasn't made by a doll maker or a puppet maker. It says he was built by a sorcerer." "Huh?" Johnny murmured. "You mean like in Harry Potter?" "Wikipedia says a sorcerer made him 100 years ago, and his head was carved out of wood from a coffin, and get this." Molly tapped the screen with her finger. "The coffin was stolen, and it had a curse on it, and so the dummy carries a curse." Ian squinted at her. "I don't get it. What does that mean?" "It means you're doomed," Vinny answered. "You're cursed. You're dead meat." The 2 brothers giggled and bumped knuckles again. Ian kept his eyes on Molly. Was she making this up? He didn't think it was funny. "There's more," Molly said, returning to the screen. Wikipedia says if you read 6 magical words out loud, Slappy will come to life. Ian's mouth dropped open. He suddenly remembered the laughing dummies in the castle of the little people. Of course, those dummies hadn't come to life. It was all a trick. But thinking about them gave Ian a chill. "Magic words? Awesome!" Vinny cried. "What are the words? Let's try it. Read us the words." Molly bit her bottom lip as she scans the page. "The words aren't here," she said, shaking her head. "No, no words. They don't have them here." "Good," Ian said. He felt another chill at the back of his neck. Maybe it's too dangerous. Maybe they didn't put the words in because the dummy is too dangerous to bring to life. "You're crazy," Molly told him. "You don't really believe a dummy can come to life, do you?" Mr. Barker twisted the wooden hand. He pushed it, then pulled it. "It's attached, all fixed," he said. "The hand is on to stay, just don't have a tug-of-war with it." He started to sit the dummy up, then stopped as something fell out of the jacket's sleeve. "Hey, what's this?" A folded-up slip of paper fell onto the work table. Mr. Barker reached for it, but Johnny got there first. Johnny unfolded the paper and squinted at it. "Hey, this has to be it. 6 weirdo words. These are the magic words to bring him to life." "Johnny, don't!" Ian cried. "Don't read them. I'm kind of scared. Please, don't read them. Please." Johnny chuckled. Then he raised the paper close to his face and shouted the words one by one. "Carew, Marie, O'Donna, Loma, Molyneux, Carano." Chapter 13. Ian gasped. A hush fell over the basement. Johnny's words seemed to linger in the air. All eyes were on the dummy. It lay on its back on the work table. Its glassy black eyes gazed blankly up at the low ceiling. Its arms hung limply at its sides. Ian realized he was holding his breath. Was the dummy about to raise his head and speak to them? Vinny broke the silence. "Maybe you didn't read the words right," he told his brother. "Let me try." He grabbed the paper from Johnny's hand. But before Vinny could read the first word, Ian took it from him. "I'd better put this in a safe place," he said. "But it didn't work," Vinny protested. "The dummy didn't move at all." Mr. Barker smiled. "Not everything on Wikipedia is true," he said. Ian tucked the paper away in a corner of the work table. He breathed a sigh of relief. He and some of his friends had watched a horror movie on Netflix about a ventriloquist dummy that came to life and started killing people with an axe. He knew it was just a movie, but he couldn't shake that creepy feeling. Ian scooped up the dummy and tossed him over his shoulder. "Thanks for fixing him, Dad," he said. He started up the basement stairs to the living room. The others followed. Molly picked up Abigail and began fiddling with her dress. Johnny and Vinny swiped cupcakes off the tray. They didn't bother to chew, just gulped them down. Then Vinny made a grab for Slappy. "My turn," he told Ian. "Not happening," Ian said. "You already broke him once." They started to argue, but the front door opened and Vinny and Johnny's dad appeared. "Hey, happy birthday, Ian," he called. "Thanks, Uncle Donnie." Mr. Harding looked a lot like his sons. He was a big, red-faced man with straight blonde hair brushed away from his forehead and striking blue eyes. His face was lined and his expression always reminded Ian of a sad clown he had seen at the circus. Mr. Harding's stomach bulged under his gray sweatshirt. His matching gray sweatpants were ripped at one knee. "Time to go, boys," he told them. "Did you have jackets or anything?" "No, it's too hot," Vinny answered. "We don't want to go," Johnny whined. "We didn't get a turn with Slappy, and I'm still hungry." Mrs. Barker laughed. Donnie, don't you feed these boys? They ate everything but the wallpaper. Mr. Harding shook his head. I'm raising monsters, seriously. You know, next week is the family talent show, Mrs. Barker told Vinny and Johnny. Maybe you can play with the dummy then. Vinny groaned. Another talent show? Do we have to? Don't start grumbling, Mr. Harding said. You know we all get together once a year and have a talent show. It's a wonderful tradition your grandparents started long before you were born. It's a dumb tradition, Johnny muttered. That's because you're dumb, Molly chimed in from the corner of the room. Don't start fighting again, Molly, Mrs. Barker snapped. Your cousins are leaving. Vinny stomped over to Molly. What do you want? She demanded. Just wanted to say goodbye, Vinny answered. Then he grabs the head of Molly's doll and snapped it backward. You broke it, Dad! He broke it! Molly shrieked. Mr. Barker scratched his head. It looks bad, but I think I can fix it. Molly glared at Vinny. Why did you do that? Because she's ugly, Vinny said. Hey, Vinny! Want to talk about ugly? A harsh voice rasped. Everyone turned to see Slappy moving in Ian's arms. Your face looks like something I pulled out of my nose! Slappy cried. Vinny growled. Ian, you jerk, you're not funny. He rushed at Ian and tried to wrestle the dummy from his arms. Guys! Uncle Donnie pulled Vinny away. Let's go, enough fighting. He led Vinny and Johnny to the front door. You boys can fight all you want, Molly called after them. Abigail and I are going to win the talent show next week. Ian snickered. Do you honestly think that old doll can compete with Slappy? You're crazy. We'll see, Molly said. We'll see. Chapter 14. After dinner the next night, Ian did his homework. Then he picked up Slappy and started to work with the dummy. He slid his hand around inside the dummy's back, practicing the moves for nodding the head and making the red-lipped mouth go up and down. Ian's hand fumbled around until he found the control for making the dummy's eyes slide back and forth. He practiced moving the eyes until it came naturally for him. Then, Ian practiced talking in a shrill voice without moving his lips. It was harder than he thought. He clamped his teeth together and recited the alphabet. The letter B was impossible to say without touching his lips together, and the letters M and P were just as hard. Now I need some jokes for our comedy act, Ian thought. But before he could begin, his father's shout rang up the stairs. Bedtime, Ian! See you at breakfast! Ian yawned. He wanted to spend more time with Slappy. There were only a few days till the family talent show, and he wanted to be ready. He yawned again. He knew he was too tired to work any longer. He carried the dummy to his bedroom closet and sat him down against the back wall. Then he pulled out his pajamas and got changed for bed. Ian fell asleep quickly with a whisper of a soft breeze outside his open bedroom window. Soon he found himself having the weirdest dream. Ian dreamed that Vinny and Johnny were ventriloquist dummies. In the dream, they had wooden heads with their blonde hair painted on top, and wooden lips that clicked when their mouths moved up and down. They were much chubbier than Slappy, and they both had big hands covered by white gloves. Ian had the Johnny dummy on one lap and the Vinny dummy on the other lap. Somehow he was able to make them both talk at once. As Ian worked their heads, the two dummies started to shout at one another. Then they began to fight, swinging their arms and smacking each other with their big wooden hands. Ian lost control. He couldn't stop the fight. The two dummies slid off his lap and began wrestling on the floor, both screaming at once. Ian woke up, laughing. What a crazy dream. His two cousins looked so dumb. Red morning sunlight washed through the open bedroom window. Ian heard birds chirping in the trees in the front yard. Blinking himself awake, he started to sit up. Whoa, wait. The closet door was open. Hadn't he closed it tightly last night? Ian pulled himself all the way up. His arm hit a bump in the covers. Ian turned, looked down, and saw the grinning face staring up at him. The grinning face of Slappy beside him in bed. Chapter 15. He's not alive. That's crazy. That's impossible. Ian shoved the dummy to the edge of the bed. Slappy's eyes gazed blankly into the sunlight from the window. Ian squeezed the dummy's middle, testing it. Slappy didn't react at all. No way, he's not alive. Ian turned and lowered his feet to the floor. A shrill scream from downstairs made him jump up. Was that Molly screaming? He took off, his bare feet slapping the rug, his heart pounding. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Another scream rang out, from the kitchen. He burst through the living room to the dining room to see Molly, red-faced, waving her doll in the air. Their dad stood by the counter, hands on his waist. "Molly, what's wrong?" Ian demanded. "Look at her! Just look!" Molly screamed. She waved the doll in Ian's face. "You know what's wrong!" Ian squinted at the doll as Molly jabbed it at him. Abigail's head was turned backward again. "Ian, how could you do that to your sister?" His dad demanded angrily. "It took me an hour to fix that doll's head, and now you think it's funny to twist it around again?" But, Ian sputtered. "Do you have any idea how valuable the doll is?" Mr. Barker asked. "How can you be so mean?" Molly wailed. "Were you trying to break Abigail's head off?" "No way!" Ian cried. "I didn't—" Mrs. Barker appeared, fastening the belt to her robe. "Ian, we know you want to win the talent contest on Saturday, but you have to play fair." "But I didn't do it!" Ian screamed. "Read my lips! It wasn't me! I didn't touch Molly's doll!" "Ha!" Molly cried. She brought her face up close to his and shouted it again. "Ha!" Ian made a disgusted face. "Your breath smells like you ate a dead mouse," he said. "I don't care!" Molly cried. "Mom and Dad didn't twist the doll's head, did they? You're the only one in the house, Ian, so stop being such a liar!" "Hand me the doll," Mr. Barker said. "I'll take her downstairs and see what I can do. We have to be careful that the head doesn't completely snap off." Molly handed Abigail to him. Ian saw his mom studying him. "She's looking at me like I'm some kind of criminal," he thought. And then he had a brain flash. He suddenly knew who had twisted Abigail's head around. Chapter 16. "You did it!" Ian screamed at his sister. "You turned the doll's head! I know it!" Molly spun around, her eyes wide with shock. "Huh? Are you joking?" "I know you did it!" Ian said, jabbing her with his pointer finger. She danced away from him. "Mom, feel Ian's head. He must have a really high fever. Listen, dumbhead, why would I wreck my own doll?" "To make me look bad," Ian said. "You wanted to make Mom and Dad think that I did it, that I was trying to cheat to win the contest, so you wrecked your own doll." "Liar!" Molly screamed. "You liar!" "Stop it, right now!" Mrs. Barker stepped between them. "Break it up! Stop being awful to each other! Do you hear me?" She shook her head. "How are we ever going to make it to talent night? And what's the big deal? It's just a family get-together." "You know Ian," Molly said, sneering. "He has to win everything." Mrs. Barker pressed her hand over Molly's mouth. "Stop! Truce! Enough, you two! I mean it!" She spun Molly around. "I put breakfast on the table. Go eat." Ian and Molly started toward the breakfast table, but stopped when they saw the grinning figure already sitting there. "Oh, wow!" Ian cried as the table came into focus. 2 glasses had been tipped over, and puddles of orange juice covered the table. The eggs from Molly's plate were smeared over the tablecloth. The seat of Mr. Barker's chair was covered in spilled ketchup. Slappy sat propped up in Molly's chair, grinning at them, the ketchup bottle in one hand. Ian saw that the dummy had egg smeared on both of his cheeks. No one said a word. Mom, Dad, and Molly stared hard at Ian. Ian took a step back. You can't think I did this!" he cried in a trembling voice. You can't! Chapter 17. That Saturday, Ian, Molly, and their 2 cousins met in Ian's backyard. "There's no way you guys can win," Ian told his cousins, "because I've had all week to practice with Slappy." "That's because Ian was grounded all week," Molly added. "He had to stay in his room after dinner every night because of the little joke he played in our kitchen on Monday." Ian rolled his eyes. "I was grounded for something I didn't do." Molly shook her head. "Ian, nobody believes you that the dummy messed up the kitchen. Nobody." The truth was that Ian kept the dummy in the back of his closet all week because he was terrified of it. Each day, he expected the dummy to stand up and burst out of the closet. Ian was sure that Slappy would do more mischief to cause him trouble. But to his surprise, the dummy never moved or giggled or talked. It stayed there, folded up in the closet, completely lifeless. Ian began to wonder if maybe the dummy had gone back to sleep for good. And now he carried it out for the talent show, mainly because everyone expected it, and because Ian had no other talent he could present. "We're not too worried about you and your dummy," Johnny told Ian. He waved a big wooden duck pen in Ian's face. "Vinny and I have been practicing too, and we're awesome." "We're going to start our own YouTube channel," Vinny said. "And we're going to have millions of subscribers." Ian laughed. "Why would anyone watch a juggling channel on YouTube? Get serious. Why would anyone spend more than 5 seconds watching you toss short, fat bowling pins back and forth?" "Because we're awesome," Johnny said. He flipped the heavy duck pin in the air, high over his head, and caught it behind his back. "You should just give up. Vinny and I have this locked." The 4 kids were standing in the shade of a wide maple tree in the Barkers' backyard. The warm Saturday afternoon sunlight felt more like summer than spring. The sun made all the fresh leaves sparkle like beaded jewels on the trees. Johnny and Vinny needed a lot of space for their duckpin juggling. So Mr. and Mrs. Barker decided their act would be better outdoors. They set up chairs facing the flat, grassy area in the center of the yard. Then they disappeared into the house. "Hey, what's keeping you guys?" Vinny shouted into the kitchen window. His mother wasn't feeling well, so Mr. Harding came alone. "It's showtime!" Mr. and Mrs. Barker and Mr. Harding finally came out of the house, carrying glasses of iced tea. All 3 of them were talking at once. Ian couldn't really hear what it was about. Something about politics, he thought. Johnny flipped a duck pin high over his head again. It came down end over end, and this time he missed it. It bounced heavily on the ground with a loud thud. Mr. Barker shielded his eyes from the sun with one hand. "You guys are juggling duck pins now?" he said. "What happened to your juggling act with the white dinner plates?" "They broke too many of them," Mr. Harding said. "The duck pins should last longer." The 3 adults sat down on folding chairs. Molly, holding Abigail in her lap, sat cross-legged in the grass. Ian stood at her side, holding Slappy against his chest. "We're first," Vinny said. He had 4 duck pins clamped in his hands. He carried them to the center of the yard. "We're first and we're best," Johnny said. "We'll be the judge of that," his dad said. Uncle Donnie should have 2 votes since Aunt Marie isn't here, Molly said.
Yeah, sweet, Vinny declared. And you'll vote for us, right, Dad?
I'll vote for the best act, Mr. Harding said. Are you two going to talk our heads off, or are you going to juggle? Ian reached down and squeezed Molly's shoulder. Better not sit too close. I'll probably bean you. Johnny turned and shook his head.
No way! You're about to witness total control.
They took their places several yards apart. Vinny pulled down the visor of his baseball cap to keep the bright sun from his eyes. They faced each other, standing straight, shoulders back. Vinny set 3 of the 4 duck pins on the grass beside him. He raised the remaining pin in his right hand.
We start with 1 pin, he announced. We end up with 4 pins in the air at once.
Johnny leaned forward and reached out a hand. Vinny sent the duck pin flying end over end. Its shadow shot across the grass. Johnny caught it easily and, in one motion, sent it sailing back to his brother. A few seconds later, there were 2 pins flying back and forth, and then 3. The boys kept their arms whirling. The pins flew rapidly. They caught them in rhythm and sent them toppling back. The 3 adults began to clap. Molly clapped too. Ian hugged Slappy to his chest. Ian's eyes darted left, then right, following the pins. "Great job!" Mr. Barker shouted. "You boys look like pros!" The 2 boys kept their eyes straight ahead. Their hands worked fast, like machines. The pins flew faster and faster between them. They're really good, Ian thought. Then they heard a hard thud that made Ian and Molly jump. Ian wasn't sure he was seeing right. Did a duck pin just smash into Johnny's head and bounce to the ground? Mrs. Barker screamed. Both dads leapt to their feet, open-mouthed. Johnny's eyes bulged. A soft moan escaped his throat. His knees folded and he went down on the grass. Crumpled, his body folded up on itself. He didn't move.
It was an accident!
Vinny screamed, running to his brother.
The pin slipped. It was an accident.
Oh no, oh no, oh no. Mrs. Barker had her hands pressed to her cheeks. Mr. Harding was down on one knee, leaning over his son. "Johnny, can you hear me? Johnny, can you open your eyes?" "We may need a doctor," Mr. Barker said. "He's out. He's unconscious." Holding Slappy tightly around his middle, Ian gasped when the dummy suddenly began to move. As the adults huddled over the fallen boy, Slappy tossed his head back and let out a long, ringing, gleeful laugh. Chapter 18. The dummy's cold laughter rang out over the yard. "Ian, what's wrong with you?" Mr. Barker shouted, looking up from the folded body of Johnny at his feet. "That's not funny. Your cousin is really hurt."